He texted me on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, still in my robe, watching the birds at the feeder my wife had put up years ago. My late wife, I should say, before any of this started. The text came through at 7:14. I remember because I looked at the clock on the microwave right after I read it. Dad, I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving. Dexter and I think it would be better if you didn't come this year. His family is flying in from Portland and the house is going to be crowded. I know you understand. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and looked at the birds. My daughter had gotten married 3 years prior, at 41, to a man she'd known for 14 months. I had walked her down the aisle. I had written the check for the venue, the Oleander Club, which does not come cheap, and I had done it gladly because she looked happy and because I had promised her mother before she passed that I would always take care of their girl. My daughter was the only child I had, and in the 4 years since that wedding, I had been a regular presence in their lives. Not intrusive. Present. There's a difference. I brought groceries when she had her back procedure. I drove 2 hours in February sleet when their furnace quit. I co-signed the loan on their house when Dexter's credit history came up thin. That last part matters. Hold on to it. I should describe Dexter, because otherwise none of what comes next makes proper sense. He was 53, 2 years younger than my daughter. He had a son from his first marriage, a boy named Colin, mid-20s, who lived in Boise and called maybe twice a year. Dexter worked in commercial real estate, which meant he talked a lot about deals that were always just about to close. He drove a Range Rover he was upside down on. He had strong opinions about wine and a habit of explaining things to people who hadn't asked. My daughter loved him, and so I kept most of what I observed to myself. The problem wasn't Dexter exactly. The problem was that when Dexter came into my daughter's life, a version of my daughter left. Not all at once. Gradually, the way water recedes. The Sunday phone calls got shorter. The invitations to dinner got spaced out, then stopped being extended at all unless I asked. When I visited, I had the distinct feeling of being scheduled, of being fit in somewhere between other obligations. I told myself it was the natural shift of a new marriage finding its footing. I told myself I was being sensitive. Her mother would have said I was being too understanding for my own good. She had a way of seeing things clearly that I've spent 20 years trying to replicate. I picked the phone back up and read the text again. His family is flying in from Portland and the house is going to be crowded. I had co-signed on that house. My name was on the mortgage paperwork, right above Dexter's, because his debt-to-income ratio alone wouldn't have satisfied the lender. I had sat in that office for 3 hours on a Thursday afternoon and signed document after document because my daughter wanted that house and I wanted her to have it. The guest room in that house, the one with the window that looked out over the backyard, I had helped paint it. I had spent a Saturday on a ladder in that room with a roller brush and a drop cloth while Dexter watched college football downstairs. His family from Portland was going to sleep in a room I had painted. I didn't respond to the text right away. I finished my coffee. I fed the birds. I took a shower and got dressed and drove to my regular Tuesday breakfast at a diner about 4 miles from the house, where a woman named Eunice has been taking my order for 11 years and never once written anything down. I ordered my usual, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, link sausage, and I sat in the corner booth and I thought. I wasn't angry. That's the part that might be hard to understand. I have lived long enough to know that anger is usually just hurt that hasn't figured out what to call itself. What I felt was something quieter and more clarifying, like when you've been squinting at something for a long time and you finally put on your glasses and everything sharpens. I saw it clearly. I had been building toward this moment for 4 years without knowing it. Not toward a confrontation. I'm not a confrontational man by nature, never have been, but toward a decision. A clean and permanent decision about what I was willing to continue doing for people who had communicated in ways both direct and indirect that my presence was a burden and my absence would be a relief. I ate my breakfast. I left Eunice a 20 on a $14 tab, which is what I always do. Then I drove to my accountant's office. Mitchell had been doing my taxes for 9 years. He knew my full financial picture. The pension from my 31 years with the city, the savings, the small investment portfolio my wife and I had built quietly over a long marriage, the life insurance. He also knew about the arrangements I'd made for my daughter over the years, the monthly transfer I had been sending her since her mother died. Not a huge amount, but consistent. The kind of thing you stop noticing until it stops. The car I was paying the insurance on because she'd rolled off my plan and hadn't set up her own. The college fund I had redirected toward her stepson from her first relationship, a kid named Brandon who is now a junior at Ohio State, because she had asked me to help when he got accepted and I had said yes without hesitation. I sat across from Mitchell and I told him what had happened, not with drama, just the facts. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I told him. The monthly transfer was the easiest thing to stop. It was a standing automated transfer from my checking account to hers, set up years ago, and I simply had Mitchell's office handle the cancellation paperwork that afternoon. Next was the car insurance. I called my agent from Mitchell's parking lot and removed the vehicle from my policy effective end of the month. The final and most significant item was the cosign on the mortgage. Now, I want to be precise here, because this is the part people sometimes misunderstand. I did not sabotage anything. I did not make any calls designed to damage their standing with the lender. What I did was contact the bank and inform them that I wished to be removed from the loan as cosigner, and that I would like to understand the process and timeline for doing so. As it turned out, and Mitchell had flagged this possibility when I signed on originally, the lender required Dexter to either refinance solely in his own name or add a qualified cosigner of their choosing. Given what I knew about Dexter's financial position, refinancing in his own name was going to be a significant challenge. That was not my problem to solve. It was information I had. But I hadn't created the situation. I had only agreed to stop carrying it. I drove home. I sat in my chair by the window, the same chair where I'd read that text that morning, and I called my sister in Charlotte. She had met Dexter once at the wedding and had formed an opinion of him in about 40 minutes that had taken me 4 years to arrive at independently. We talked for a long time. She said, "You did what you had to do. Now be still and let it land where it lands." I have a good sister. I did not text my daughter back that day. I let Tuesday become Wednesday. I had my regular Wednesday morning walk with a friend from church, a man named August who had buried his own wife the previous spring, and who understood without much explanation what it felt like to love people who sometimes seemed not to notice. We walked our usual 3 miles around the park without discussing any of it, and that was its own kind of help. Thursday I texted my daughter back, "No problem. Hope everyone has a nice holiday." 4 words less than her text to me. I didn't plan that. It just worked out that way. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with August and his daughter's family 2 streets over. Crowded house, too much food, a football game on a television the size of a barn door, 3 children under 6 years old running through the halls. I ate well. I slept fine that night. The first call came the following Monday. My daughter's voice had that particular tension in it that I associated with bad news being dressed up carefully before delivery. She said they'd received a letter from the mortgage company. She said there seemed to be some kind of issue with the cosigner on the loan. She asked if I knew anything about it. I said yes. I told her I had requested to be removed. There was a silence that lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then she said, "Dad, you can't do that." I said, "I can, and I have." She said, "Why would you do that? Do you have any idea what this means for us?" I said, "I have a fairly clear idea, yes?" She asked me what had gotten into me. She used that phrase, "what has gotten into you," as if I were acting out of character, when the truth was that I had been acting so consistently within character for so long that people had simply stopped accounting for the possibility that my patience had a bottom. I am 64 years old. I have been steady and reliable and quietly generous my entire adult life. I understand how that can lead people to assume the arrangement is permanent and unconditional. It is not permanent, and conditions, it turns out, are something I am able to set. I told her that I had also canceled the monthly transfer and removed the car from my insurance. I told her she would want to handle that last part before the end of the month. I kept my voice level. I wasn't punishing anyone, at least not in the way people use that word to mean something petty. I was simply adjusting what I was doing to match the relationship I actually had, rather than the one I had been imagining or hoping for. She cried. That was hard. I'm her father. Her tears have never been easy for me to sit with. But I had learned, somewhere in my 6th decade, that sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is let someone feel the full weight of a consequence without rushing to lift it. I said, I love you. Call me when you want to talk. Then I let her go. The next call came 4 days later. It was Dexter. He did not call to apologize. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters for the full picture. He called to negotiate. He was calm and businesslike in a way that told me he had probably rehearsed the conversation. He said he understood I was upset about the holiday. He said the decision hadn't been meant as a slight, that it was simply a matter of space and his family's comfort. He said he was sure we could work this out. I asked him one question. I said, when I co-signed that mortgage, what did you tell the loan officer your household income was? He said, what does that have to do with anything? I said, I'm just asking. He said, I don't see how that's relevant to what we're discussing. I said, Dexter, I was a city employee for 31 years. I know what relevant means and I know when someone's avoiding a question. He got quiet. I told him I didn't have anything else to add. I told him the bank had my contact information if they needed anything further from me. I told him I hoped the refinance process went smoothly for them. Then I said, have a good evening, and I hung up. I want to tell you what happened next, because people always want to know. They want to know if my daughter came around, if Dexter finally said something real, if the house got sorted, if there was some moment where everything clarified. Here is what happened. 3 weeks after that call with Dexter, my daughter asked if she could come see me. She came alone on a Saturday afternoon, and we sat at the same kitchen table where I had read that first text. She had brought a pie from a bakery she knew I liked, pecan, which had been her mother's specialty, and which I always appreciated when someone else made the effort. She sat across from me and she said, I owe you an apology. I let her finish before I said anything. She talked for a while. She talked about how she had let Dexter's discomfort with me shape the distance between us. She talked about how she had told herself I was fine, that I was sturdy, that I would always be there regardless. She talked about her mother and about how, since her mother died, she had been afraid to lean on me too hard because she was afraid of losing me too, and that fear had twisted itself into a kind of pulling away that she knew, even while doing it, wasn't right. I had not expected that last part. It reordered some things for me. I said, I know. I said, I'm not going anywhere. But I need you to know that I'm a person, not a fixture. I have feelings that work exactly like everyone else's feelings. She nodded. She said she knew that. I said, the money is not what this was about. She said, I know that too. We had a piece of pie. The afternoon light came through the window the way it does in November, low and golden and a little thin, and I thought about her mother and how she would have handled this better and faster, but how she also would have been glad we got there at all. About the house. They managed the refinance eventually. It was not easy for them, and there were some months I heard, through my daughter, were genuinely tight. I did not offer to help. That is the part that some people, when I tell this story, say makes me sound hard. I don't think I am hard. I think I finally understood the difference between helping because I wanted to and helping because I was afraid of what would happen to the relationship if I didn't. The first kind builds something. The second kind just delays a reckoning. Dexter and I do not have a warm relationship. We are civil. We speak at family gatherings with the careful politeness of two people who have sized each other up and decided that direct conflict costs more than it's worth. That is, I suspect, as good as it is going to get, and I have made my peace with that. My daughter calls every Sunday now. Not every single Sunday. Life is life, and sometimes it's a Thursday instead, or a quick text when her week gets away from her, but regularly, reliably, in a way that feels chosen rather than obligated, which is the only way I've ever wanted it. Brandon finished his junior year at Ohio State with a solid GPA. He called me on my birthday in October, unprompted, and we talked for 20 minutes about his plans after graduation. That phone call meant more to me than I could have told him without embarrassing us both. I still have my Tuesday breakfasts at the diner. Eunice still doesn't write anything down. I still leave a $20 on a $14 tab, because some things you keep doing not because anyone is watching, but because it's who you are. I sat at that kitchen table one morning not long ago, and I thought about the version of myself that had read that text in his robe with his second cup of coffee. That quiet, patient man who had spent a lifetime being useful to people and had asked very little in return. I was still that man. I hadn't changed who I was. I had just stopped pretending that being quiet and patient meant I had no boundaries at all. There's a version of this story where I am the difficult one, where I am the father who overreacted, who pulled financial support over a holiday squabble, who made his daughter's life harder over bruised feelings. I have heard that version from people who only have part of the picture. I don't argue with them. People are going to see what they see. What I know is this: the table where I drink my coffee in the morning is the same table where my wife and I used to drink ours together. 30-some years of mornings, and she used to say that a person's dignity is not something they earn each day. It's something they either protect or they give away, a little at a time, in small, quiet compromises until they look up one day and don't recognize themselves. I recognized myself in that moment in Mitchell's parking lot, phone to my ear, making a calm request of an insurance agent. I had simply decided to protect something that was mine. I keep coming back to that Tuesday morning, the coffee, the birds at the feeder, the way a single text message can land so quietly and still rearrange everything. People hear this story and they want to know if I regret it. They want to know if I was too hard, too cold, too calculated. I understand why they ask. But I think the question they're really asking is this: when someone you love treats you like a resource instead of a person, what do you owe them? I don't think the answer is more patience. I tried patience. I had been trying it for 4 years, and what patience bought me was a room I painted being offered to strangers while I sat home alone on Thanksgiving. What I learned, and I mean really learned, the kind that settles into your bones, is that doing right by people and doing right by yourself are not opposites. I had confused generosity with self-erasure for a long time. I thought if I kept showing up, kept signing documents, kept sending money, kept making myself useful, that the relationship would eventually reflect all of that back to me. That is not how it works. What I was actually teaching everyone around me, without meaning to, was that my presence had no weight, that I would absorb any treatment and continue regardless, that my dignity was negotiable. It wasn't. It never had been. I had just stopped protecting it. The thing that took the most honesty to admit was that I'd participated in this, not maliciously, not even consciously most of the time, but every time I swallowed something that deserved to be said, every time I filled a gap that someone else should have filled, every time I made myself smaller to keep the peace, I was training people to expect that. And when I finally stopped, they were genuinely confused, because I had been so consistent for so long that my limits had become invisible to them. My daughter is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. She was a person who had stopped thinking carefully about what she was doing because I had made it so easy not to. That is not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And knowing the difference between those two things, that is something I had to develop slowly, over years, the hard way. Dexter is who he is. I do not spend energy on Dexter. What I do spend energy on is making sure that the love I give going forward is given freely, not from fear, not from habit, not from some old promise I made to myself about being the kind of man who never lets people down, because that promise, as noble as it sounded, had quietly become a trap. The most important thing I ever did for my relationship with my daughter was let her feel what it cost when I wasn't there. not to punish her, to show her that I was real, that I was a man who could be lost, not just a man who would always be found. She calls on Sundays now, sometimes Thursdays. It feels chosen. That is the only way I ever wanted it. I think about my wife and the things she used to say about dignity. She was right. You protect it daily in the small decisions, or you give it away in the same small increments until there is nothing left to protect. I am 64 years old. I have enough years behind me to know what I am worth, and enough years ahead of me, God willing, to spend them accordingly.